Greetings of a good day to the academic event organizers, fellow paper presenters, and participants of the 2025 International Conference on Emerging Trends in Research and Innovation, organized by the International Congress of Innovation-Based Educators and Researchers, Inc. I am Dr. Galahad Randall Unciano of the Ghietuary Research Consultancy in Social Sciences, Urdaneta City, Pangasinan, Philippines. I will be presenting to you my study entitled The Politics of Anti-Corruption, Rhetorical Strategies and Messaging by Philippine Legislators with Gender-Comparative Analysis. This study was completed October of the current year 2025. This is also the first time that I am publicly presenting this paper in this conference. I would like to thank the team and management of ICIBER for this gracious opportunity. The full paper format of this study is archived on ResearchGate and Academia, which is open access in case you want to check it out. My study anchors on several key concepts such as political messaging, rhetorical analysis, gender analysis, political communication and discourse, and corruption in the Philippines. I designed this study to be interdisciplinary with its research phenomena, methods, and theoretical framework presupposing the intersection of political science, communication studies, and applied linguistics. They also happen to reflect my versatile academic specializations and my subjects of interest. Starting off with the rationale behind this research endeavor, in response to the 2025 flood control corruption scandals, members of both the Senate and the House of Representatives in the Philippines have publicly expressed strong condemnation, launched investigations, and demanded accountability for those involved. I was motivated by this systemic corruption exposed and the need to understand how political language shapes public understanding and accountability. So my study actually examined the rhetorical strategies and messaging used by Philippine legislators in response to these corruption scandals. My study also poses significance across various interests. In conducting this study, I evaluated how political language shapes public understanding of government actions, specifically regarding current issues of corruption in the flood control project scandal. I also determined if the current corruption discourse is helpful in finding real solutions for our country and potentially influencing public opinion and policy. I exposed how political messaging might be used to downplay or distract from the issue of corruption. I determined if the way our government is communicating about the scandal is genuinely contributing to problem solving or if it is hindering its progress. It is my hope that my study can help the public to become more discerning about the political messages they encounter. By identifying the rhetorical strategies used by legislators, I provided a framework that can help citizens critically evaluate whether a politician is genuinely addressing corruption or using specific rhetoric for mere political gain. This current slide shows the general problem of my research. My study analyzed the rhetoric in the political messages of Philippine legislators in response to the ongoing flood control corruption scandals, which was actually the setting when this study was conducted last October of 2025. The corpus of analysis included samples of political messaging from our local legislators, which were extracted from news archives and social media posts. Descriptive and inferential comparative analysis were performed to explore the nuances in rhetorical strategies across legislators who were grouped according to type and sex. It also tested the potential link between legislators' choice of rhetoric strategies and the rhetoric types that shape their political messages. The scope of my investigations revolved around the six research questions of my study. My study addressed a total of four descriptive research questions and two inferential research questions. The inferential questions generated a total of four hypotheses that were tested statistically. Integral to the objective of my study is the eventual production of a research output. Based on the merits of my research findings and the insights gained, I developed a descriptive rhetorical model of legislative anti-corruption messaging, or DRM LAM, which is localized in the Philippine setting. As the term suggests, this descriptive model is intended to show patterns and regularities that characterize the political language of Philippine legislators, focusing on their use of rhetoric styles. This model also clarifies how Philippine lawmakers navigate the complex ethical and political dilemmas they face when addressing corruption. As the output of my study, I developed this model which is intended to serve as a resource for academics, educators, or anyone interested in the intersection of communication, politics, and social justice. The 40-page document is separately archived in my accounts in ResearchGate and academia, which are publicly accessible. This slide shows the conceptual diagram of the model that I developed. In terms of research methodology, my study's investigative framework and procedure operated within an exploratory sequential mixed methods research design. Given this type of research design, two contiguous phases were involved: a qualitative phase followed by a quantitative phase. The initial qualitative phase of my study involved the use of rhetorical analysis to identify the specific rhetorical strategies and types inherent in the political messages. After completing this phase, the investigations transitioned to a quantitative phase that involved descriptive analysis to identify frequency patterns and prevalence of rhetorical strategies and types manifested in the political messages of the legislators, and a further inferential analysis using chi-square test of independence to test the study's null hypothesis. I would like to note that I used manual data analysis, or MDA, in my conduct of rhetorical analysis instead of availing computer-assisted qualitative data analysis softwares, so that my effort to go through all the text in my corpus is really labor intensive. In using the MDA mode, I utilize two rubrics or analytical frameworks as shown in this slide as a guide for me to categorize the rhetorical strategies and rhetorical types that are inherent in the political messages that were segments extracted from from the texts. Since my research essentially employs discourse analysis, specifically rhetorical analysis, the unit of analysis in my study is called a rhetorical artifact, or RA. In the context of my study, these RAs are actually segments of political messages on the subject of anti-corruption authored by Philippine legislators that were extracted from numerous texts. The aggregate of all these texts that I analyzed comprised the corpus of the study. In case you may be wondering how this corpus was determined, I used purposive sampling aided by intelligent sampling. Purposive sampling was used because I needed to first identify who among the Philippine legislators from the two chambers have prominently and consistently spoken about anti-corruption in the context of the ongoing political discourse on the flood control corruption scandals. This is where intelligent sampling comes handy, because AI can literally nominate who these legislators are based on the density of their contributions of anti-corruption messages. AI can perform an automated search through massive data sets like news archives, social media, or public records. AI also performed the automated search of all the texts containing the relevant political messages from these legislators that I needed for my study. After securing all these resources, it was my turn to manually perform the rhetorical analysis of the texts. With the sampling procedures that I previously explained, it led me to the identification of 13 senators and 9 members of the House of Representatives, and a total of 194 texts that contain the relevant anti-corruption messages of the 22 Philippine legislators. In manually sorting all the texts out from each text, I needed to extract the segments that bear the political messages. From the 194 texts, I extracted a total of 483 samples of political messages, or SPMs. These SPMs were the real focus of analysis, and they were also numerous enough to enable me to subject these units for inferential analysis. Notice the tables in this slide that illustrate the amount of texts analyzed. The presentation deliberately de-emphasizes the identity of the authors. This was done for the sake of research ethics. The identity of the legislators were deliberately concealed, as well as those actual texts attributed to them that contain their political messages, in order to prevent the possibility of their re-identification. Since there is no enough time to thoroughly discuss the details of my research findings, I will only show the sets of tabulated data that were used in discussing the results of my analysis corresponding to each research question. For example, this slide shows the results of analysis corresponding to the rhetorical strategies in the anti-corruption messaging of Philippine legislators, separately showing the accounts of the senators and the members of the House of Representatives. This slide shows the results of analysis corresponding to the rhetoric types in the anti-corruption messaging of Philippine legislators, separately showing the accounts of the senators and the members of the House of Representatives. This slide shows the results of analysis corresponding to the frequency, patterns, and prevalence of rhetorical strategies in legislative anti-corruption messaging, separately showing the accounts of the senators and the members of the House of Representatives. This slide shows the results of analysis corresponding to the frequency, patterns, and prevalence of rhetorical types in legislative anti-corruption messaging, separately showing the accounts of the senators and the members of the House of Representatives. This slide shows the results of analysis that calculated the difference in the extent of utilization of invitational and intrusive rhetorical strategies as manifested in the legislative anti-corruption messages. A table showing an initial descriptive comparison was used, and a separate inferential analysis using chi-square test of independence to confirm statistically if a significant difference exists. This slide shows the results of analysis that calculated the difference in the extent of utilization of the four rhetorical types as manifested in the legislative anti-corruption messages. A table showing an initial descriptive comparison was used, and a separate inferential analysis using chi-square test of independence to confirm statistically if significant difference exists. This slide shows the results of analysis that calculated the difference between the male and female authored anti-corruption messages in their manifestation of rhetorical strategies. A table showing an initial descriptive comparison was used, and a separate inferential analysis using chi-square test of independence to confirm statistically if significant difference exists. This slide shows the results of analysis that calculated the difference between the male and female authored anti-corruption messages in their manifestation of rhetorical types. A table showing an initial descriptive comparison was used, and a separate inferential analysis using chi-square test of independence to confirm statistically if significant difference exists. This slide shows the results of analysis that calculated the link between the use of certain rhetorical strategies and rhetorical type of anti-corruption messages. In this analysis, the frequency of prevalence of rhetorical strategies was compared with the frequency of prevalence of rhetorical types. Because there were only a few legislators involved in the study, which was beyond my control, an inferential analysis was not possible. Instead, cross-tabulation was used as shown in this slide. Now, moving on to my research conclusions, there is a pattern of selective and limited legislative engagement with the current corruption issues in the Philippines. The small number of senators and extremely low percentage of the members of the House of Representatives publicly addressing corruption suggest a widespread legislative silence. This low This low rate of engagement, especially among members of the House of Representatives, can foster a public perception of complicity, which ultimately undermines confidence in government institutions. Majority of the individual senators primarily used an invitational rhetorical strategy, while majority of the members of the House of Representatives favored an invitational rhetoric approach. The use of rhetoric types differed between the Senate and the House of Representatives. Populist rhetoric was the most common type used by senators, which may indicate how senators view it as the more effective or politically beneficial approach for simplifying complex corruption issues. Institutional rhetoric was the second most common, indicating that some senators prefer to frame issues within a legal and governmental context. Rhetoric of inaction was the most common type for the members of the House of Representatives, which suggests their prevalent tendency to frame their action as constrained by external factors or to deflect responsibility. Populist rhetoric was also highly common among them, but institutional rhetoric was not a prevalent strategy for any of them, suggesting that members of the House of Representatives are less likely to rely on formal institutional language compared to the senators. There is a statistically significant difference in the use of rhetorical strategies between male and female legislators across types of legislators. Male legislators were more likely to use invitational rhetoric, while female legislators were more likely to use intrusive rhetoric. Contrary to traditional gender stereotype about communication styles, findings in this study suggest that female politicians may be adopting a more assertive approach to establish authority and navigate a male-dominated political environment. There is a statistically significant difference in the use of rhetorical types between the sexes. Only male legislators used institutional rhetoric and rhetoric of denial or justification, while female legislators primarily used populist rhetoric and rhetoric of inaction. The use of an invitational strategy was most likely to shape legislators' anti-corruption messaging to assume a populist rhetoric impression, while intrusive strategies were most likely to shape their political messaging to assume a rhetoric of inaction impression. These findings imply that intrusive rhetoric is more likely to be associated with negative outcomes, such as having political messages that communicate denial, justification, and inaction, which could damage public trust over these legislators. Based on the merits and insights gained from my research findings, I offered recommendations that I signified to the interest of Philippine legislators. My study actually implies that it is more advantageous for politicians to be seen as taking a stand on issues, especially when it comes to corruption. My recommendations also signify to the interest of the Filipino citizens, the interest of political science education and curriculum, the interest of language and communication arts and curriculum. As for future research, in discussing the implications of my research findings, I offered a clue on the potential implications of different rhetoric types on public trust. Although this was beyond my study scope of investigation. As such, further research, as I would suggest, can empirically measure how specific rhetorical strategies are received by the public. For example, future research can analyze how invitational rhetoric might be misconstrued as weakness or how intrusive rhetoric could lead to cynicism. Such studies will involve more than textual analysis but will involve surveys with public citizens who are consumers of political messages. In closing my presentation, please allow me to mention the impetus and inspiration behind my conceptualization and conduct of this study. To the good legislators of this country whose political messaging on anti-corruption became the inspiration for this study, this modest work is humbly offered. In spirit, I join the countless Filipinos bravely advocating for justice and equitable governance, particularly those who marched on the streets and utilized online platforms to demand government accountability regarding the grand flood control corruptions. In your honor, this study is respectfully dedicated. This public dissemination of the study was supported by extramural funding from generous friends, sponsors, and supporters of the noble causes of the Ghietuary Research Consultancy in Social Sciences. My special thanks for the sponsorship of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph and Remedios Venenciano Carbonell of Anatolia Village, Rancho Cordova, California. Thank you very much for listening.